Now, as you all know, with the capture of Kabul by the Taliban on August 15th, 2021, 20 years of US involvement in Afghanistan effectively ended. This costing trillions of dollars and thousands of lives for the US. And following this, many of you also well may know, President Biden's approval rating slumped to 43% in September. And if the backlash was so great, this kind of raises the question, why did the US withdraw from Afghanistan? Well, in this presentation, I'm going to be arguing that the catalyst for withdrawal from Afghanistan was the US's changing foreign policy priorities, which have turned to focus more on Chinese containment under Trump and Biden presidencies in the Indo-Pacific region. However, to an extent, there is also long-term issues which meant that withdrawal was inevitable at some point. Is due to geopolitical issues, and which is what is going to be argued in my article I chose in the conversation. So this article, Natasha Linstead, wrote that the US could never have achieved a stable victory in Afghanistan due to partly geography and politics of the country and region in general. She then concludes that whilst many have criticised Biden for the withdrawal, these aforementioned issues meant the war was impossibly decisive anyway, and this was the main reason for the US withdrawal. Now, what issues do I talking about? I'm talking about how the Pashtun and Baloch ethnic groups have always strived to create ancestral homelands in the region, and additionally, Afghanistan is a highly mountainous region, lots of valleys. It's the foothills of the Himalayas, of course, and this leads to a country which is highly decentralized. She also argues that Afghanistan's international position between Central and Southeast Asia means a lot of people have vested interests. Think about Soviets in the 1980s, or the Taliban being supported by Pakistan in the 1990s. These were countries which is highly unstable and highly decentralized, and this means that any war the US got involved in was inevitable. It was going to fail. So the withdrawal was just justified in that case, just to pure internal issues within the region justified the withdrawal. However, I'm going to be arguing that even more important than this is changing foreign policy priorities. As, for example, China under Xi Jinping has increasingly clashed with the US Pacific interests in the past decade. Owen Green and Christopher Bluff in their article, another article in the conversation, argue that the Taiwanese defense minister is saying the military challenge from China was the toughest in 40 years. This shows there is a military build-up in the region, and the US is countering this by putting more effort in prioritising the Indo-Pacific region. Now, what thing that we're talking about? Well, for example, past few months, the AUKUS agreement was signed between the US, UK, and Australia, which permitted Australia to acquire nuclear submarines, of course, and it's kind of seen as an anti-China pact, although not officially, it kind of is. Over in Japan, many populists have called for the repealing of the 75-year-old peace constitution. This has shown the region is becoming more of a hot point. The Americans are looking more to this region than, for example, Afghanistan. However, it should be taken into account as shown by the map over here. US treaty allies have existed since really the end of the Second World War, so this is not a new thing. However, US putting more effort into it now was meant one of the reasons for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. External issues. However, there are people who don't agree with this opinion at all. Of my point, I'm looking at Anthony Benjamin D. Hopkins. In the article "The War That Destroyed America: Afghanistan's Coming Bill," argued that it was internal issues, damage to the political, social, and financial institutions of the US from the war. He talks about how there's been militarization of the American policing due to the war, and there's been a mix of the war on terror and the war on drugs, and this has damaged the US socially. Of course, it doesn't directly say it's due to how contemporary this issue is, but you can infer that he thinks that the main reason for the US withdrawal was due to the intense social issues the war has caused on American society. Well, in conclusion, I believe that despite the damage that home war has caused, it is a factor, of course, everything's a factor. I do think that the main overarching factors is due to international factors such as China and Chinese militarization, which have shifted US priorities, and also regional issues in the region itself, which were the long-term reason for pulling out, as I said earlier in the Natasha Linstead article. Thank you for listening to my presentation. This is a bit of a bibliography, what sources I used, and this has been insightful.